Good morning. I'm excited to be with you. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I say that for a couple of reasons about how glad I am to be here. One thing that I want to share with you is, of course, the beauty that I observe around me, and I've noticed the warmness of the temperatures in this place. It is quite pleasant, let me tell you. I flew in late Thursday night, and Kevin came and picked me up, and we got to his house early Friday morning. I think we got to bed between 2 and 3 o'clock, but we got up on Friday morning, and we drove around just a little bit. And in driving around, we on? Okay. Oh, I'm not on. That's what the problem is. All right, there we go. Now I think we're rolling. Well, in driving around, this is one of the beautiful images, and thank you, I believe it is to Brother Bob, if I'm not mistaken, for letting us take some beautiful pictures in his backyard. And you notice, of course, you get this all the time, all the greenery around you. And so I was kind of curious, and I asked my wife, I said, would you mind to take a picture outside, in our backyard, just outside of our home, and I'd like to see what it looks like right there right now, and I thought I might share that with you. That's what it looked like at my house on Friday. But the interesting thing is... He's warming it up there. So. Okay. Oh, I got you. Okay. So we're still a little bit behind. Okay. But anyway, so yeah, it's so pretty here, and at home, as you'll see here in just a minute, it's a very different image. Well, then I had my mother... now we're on the same page, aren't we? See, this is what I saw when I came, and yeah, this is what was going on. Look at the big, beautiful flakes, though. Pretty good shot that she took this just outside my kid's play set. All right, well, on Saturday then, my mom texted me, and she said, I hope you're enjoying the weather down there. This is just yesterday, and she lives about an hour south of where we do, and as you can see, there wasn't as much snow there, but the freezing rain just continued to come. And so at Kevin's prompting, if you can imagine this, at Kevin's prompting, he said we ought to take a picture of what Florida picnic tables look like right now. And so that's exactly what we did yesterday, and I sent that image back to her, and I said, boy, it's just, these Florida picnic tables, they're terrible, but you can find some way, I guess, to make use of them. So, no, thank you very much on account of the weather for asking me to come down in February. That is greatly appreciated, and I owe you big time for that. But much, much more so, thank you for the invitation to be with you all. And I want you to know that's the real treat that's involved. I love the Patterson family so much. He may or may not mention, and he doesn't need to if so, but we do go a little ways back. I think probably my first introduction to the Patterson family was when I went to preaching school at the Bible Institute of Missouri. And of course, he was an instructor there for me. And I believe I can honestly say this, that between him and his father, do they know your dad pretty well? Okay. Between Kevin and Max, I think I probably take still today the most from those classes, from those two teachers than any other. And that's not to put any others down or anything. It was great, all of it. But I'm just very, very grateful and very indebted to them. And so I guess that's probably why I'm here. Kevin told me I was going to be here this week in February, and so I had no choice, and that's why I'm here. So, no, I'm very glad to be here. It's such a privilege for that to be the case. I'm really looking forward to this week together. As Kevin mentioned, the overall theme I've selected, and it was approved by the eldership here, is to spend a week with Jesus. And I think it's probably the goal of every one of us that we want to spend not really a week with Jesus, but we want to spend eternity with Jesus, don't we? And so if you could select just 1 week with anyone that you could spend, who would you rather spend that time than with Jesus in anticipation for eternity? And so that's what we're going to do in this week together. I hope you find some enjoyment out of it. I hope you find some encouragement, but even more, I hope you find some challenge out of it, and I think you will do so. And I say that in part because I know I've certainly found a challenge in putting these lessons together and studying them, and I hope you find the same benefit from them. We're going to be looking at the lives of different people and how Jesus encountered and how he interacted with them. And it's so remarkable to see the transformation that takes place in so many people's lives just because they spend a little bit of time with Jesus. I'm curious to see at the end of this week, are our lives going to be transformed because we took a little bit of time and we spent it with Jesus. For our first study, we're going to be in the 7th chapter of Luke. I don't know how Kevin and how others usually do PowerPoint. Everyone has their own style, and that's all good. The way I like to do PowerPoint is I'll put the scriptures on the screen, and what you'll see, the scriptures come from the New King James Version. If you prefer to use your own personal copy of the Bible, I'm not in the least trying to discourage that. Please do that. That would be excellent if you want to. I just do that for convenience sake for those who would like to follow along. So the passages will be before you on the screen. In this first story in Luke chapter 7, this is going to become a very memorable day, not only for this guy, but for everybody who's involved. But this gentleman, he's of course a man living in the first century. This man is a Jew. And he has the joy of a lifetime in receiving a distinguished guest into his home. We're going to start in verse 36 of Luke chapter 7, where it's stated, "Then one of the Pharisees," we're going to be given his name in just a moment. We don't have it right now. But it's mentioned, "Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house, and he sat down to eat." Now, I know it doesn't come across very well in English, but in the original language, these verb tenses signify continuous action and past time. And so basically what's being stated here is this guy continued to ask Jesus to come to his house to eat. Now, the only reason he would keep on asking him the same question is because probably Jesus initially says, "Well, thanks, but no thanks." And I don't think Jesus is being rude here. He just has so many things that he needs to accomplish every day. He probably feels like he doesn't have time to go do that. You ever had someone to ask you to go do something with them, and you kind of like to, but you just have so much going on? "Well, thanks. Maybe I'll take a rain check this time." "Oh, come on. It won't be too long." "No, really. I appreciate it. I'm just so busy." "Oh, come on." They won't take no for an answer. Okay. And so Jesus eventually goes to this man's house and he eats. Now, let's not forget who Jesus is. Yeah, we realize he's a human being, but according to John chapter 1, verse 1, he's also a divine being, meaning he's God in the flesh. And John 1 goes on to tell us about Jesus in verse 3, "All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made." Folks, Jesus is the creator of the universe, being God himself. I really like the way Colossians 1 puts it in verses 16 and 17 when it progresses to make this statement that he is the sustainer, or he's the one who holds the universe together. I really like this idea for it, that he's the glue that keeps everything together. So not only is he the reason that the universe is in existence, but without him, the universe would just fall apart. It wouldn't continue working without him. And so this place right here, this whole universe, we have the third rock from the sun, planet Earth, and that's really good for you and me because we live on it. If you look up the definition of a house in the dictionary, it's a place you live. It's a dwelling. And so there's a sense in which you might look at this globe as a giant house. Whose house is that, though? That's Jesus' house. And he enables more than 7 billion persons to live on this big house that we call planet Earth. And so, who's more hospitable than Jesus? Having more than 7 billion persons into his home and just staying with him on a daily basis. You see how hospitable Jesus is? And now this guy, he has a great pleasure, doesn't he? He has the chance to invite the most hospitable person there is to his house, and he can show hospitality toward him. Now, Simon's abode would be very humble compared to the houses that you and I have in 21st century America. It's a very humble dwelling compared to the huge house that the Lord has in all of planet Earth. But he has the chance to repay Jesus with just a little bit of the goodness that Christ has showed him and showed his family through all of these years. And when Jesus comes into his house, Simon should have been fixated on Christ. The only issue, though, is somewhere along the way, Simon's attention shifts elsewhere. It becomes focused on, verse 39, who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. We don't know exactly what the sins of this woman are. Now, this is the thinking of Simon toward her, and in just a little bit, Jesus is going to back up what it is that Simon is thinking here, and he's going to state about this woman's sins, whatever they were, they are great, they are many. We don't know exactly what those sins were, But considering of how renowned of a sinner she is in her community, it's led many scholars to conclude that there's a strong likelihood that she could have been a town prostitute. We don't know for sure what it was, but we know that she is a bad sinner in her community. And Simon sees her, and he's thinking, what in the world's Jesus doing letting this woman touch him? She's nasty. She's a sinner. Simon becomes so focused on this sinner that he becomes distracted. And because Simon becomes distracted by this sinner, there are many things in this episode on which Simon misses out. Because he's so fixated on the past of this woman, he doesn't notice what's going on in the present in connection to her. We read just a moment ago in verse 39. I want to back up to verses 37 and 38 of our text, Luke 7, 37 and 38. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil. Now, I don't like to do this, but I'm going to do it a few different times today, so maybe I do, and I'm just fooling myself. I ask you, if you will, to hold on to that detail for just a moment. I don't want to address it right now. We're going to come back to it, of what she brings to Jesus and what she's going to use on his body. She stands at Jesus' feet behind him, weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears, and she began to wipe them with the hair of her head. She kissed his feet, and she anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now, those are also details to which we're going to come back in a minute, but I really want to focus on this one at the start of verse 38. She approached Jesus when she hears that he's in that house. She stands behind him. She's probably ashamed to come in front of him into his vision. She stands behind him at his feet, weeping. Now, let's try to formulate these things as far as what they mean for us in our culture, because Jesus isn't literally here in the flesh right before us as he was for this woman, these people, and all these stories that we're going to be covering this week. But when is it that we step into the presence of deity today? Do we not do so in an environment like what we find ourselves right now? And let's say that it's in a church assembly like this, and there's a child of God, which, by the way, under Old Testament law, this woman in this place would have been. And there's this child of God who's wayward, who hasn't come to church in so long. Maybe she's had fellowship withdrawn from her in the church, and she's been living in sin. Everyone in the community knows how terrible of a sinner she's been for so long, and she comes into this place, into the worship of God for the first time in so long, and she just has an absolute emotional meltdown. Now, if that's a man or if that's a woman, whoever it might be, who does such a thing, if you just use a little bit of logical deduction, what does that tell you about the person? What's going on within him or her? Is it not? I'm sorry.
They're penitent.
Okay, very good. Is there not a transformation that's taking place on the inside? So-and-so has been living according to his or her will, but now there's a desire to live according to a different will. Have you ever fallen away from God and come back home? I've done that before. That is a humbling experience, isn't it? Do you just want to step right into the eyesight of God and stand boldly before him? You kind of want to stand behind him, don't you? You know that you don't deserve even to be looked at by him. He's too innocent to look at the sinfulness that we bring before him. And so you have this penitent individual who's torn up over her sins. She's been living a terrible existence, but she's ready to change. But Simon is fixated on the past of this woman, and he doesn't notice the transformation that's taking place within her. Because Simon becomes distracted by the past of this woman. He's so focused on this individual's flaws, he doesn't bother to see the flawlessness of Jesus that's right before him. Verse 39, now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself. Now that's going to be important. He doesn't have the courage to vocalize what he's really feeling on the inside. You ever want to say something and so you just quietly talk to yourself so nobody hears it and thinks you're crazy? You got some good conversations to go on with yourself sometimes, don't you? But other people would look down on you if they knew what was going on within you. Well, that's what Simon's doing. He's having a conversation within himself. There's no way he's going to vocalize this to anybody, especially not to Jesus. But Simon speaks to himself saying, well, this man, if he were a prophet, he would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. Remember, this is a nasty person. Why would Jesus, if he's supposed to be so great, why would he allow a gross person who's unclean, filled with sin, come into contact with him? Well, that's what's going on through his mind right now. This man, if he were a prophet, question for you, is Jesus a prophet? Oh, yes. Is that all that he is, though? You see what Simon's thinking? If this man were some kind of impressive human being, oh, he's an impressive human being, all right. But he's also an impressive divine being. He's God Almighty. Simon, he's your creator. And he's your sustainer. And if you would recognize it, he could be your savior. That's the kind of power that this man is carrying. But because he becomes distracted by this sinner, and he's so focused on the negatives about her past. I want to be very clear about something. I don't want anyone to think from this study, I'm saying if someone's presently involved in wrongdoing, that we should turn a blind eye to sin. That's not the purpose of this study, and please don't feel that way about it. We're talking about a person who is involved in sin, but she's changing and she's demonstrating the signs of that. She's repenting of her sins. And there's a big difference between those two circumstances. But because he's focused on how bad she's been in the past, he's not focusing at all in the present on how great Christ is. Because he's focused on her past negatives, he's losing his focus about how he ought to be emphasizing the wonderful nature of Jesus in the present. Okay, well, how does this apply to you and I today? I want to give you a scenario. I'm sure none of you can possibly relate to this, but have you ever been in a worship service? You know, you come into the presence of God in the present to focus on His wonderful positives. That's the main purpose of worship, and we get other benefits out of that too. But that's what we do in worship. Have you ever found your mind drifting during the worship of God? I'm sure that has never taken place with a single person. Every now and then that happens, even though you're not trying to do so. Have you ever, I mentioned this in the youth day yesterday, but have you ever committed the cardinal worship sin of grandma and turned your head or looked back behind you? Why do mom and dad, why do grandma and grandpa never want you to do that? They understand you lose your focus whenever you do that. Have you ever looked to the left or the right of you during worship and you don't intend to do this, but you notice brother so-and-so over here? Oh, I remember, 15 years ago, brother so-and-so, man, he drank like a fish. He doesn't now. He's come back to the Lord. And then you start thinking about brother so-and-so's past, though, and what that was. Boy, I bet that was rough. I wonder why he ever did that in the first place. And then you turn your head to the left and you see sister so-and-so over here. Maybe you went to school together 25 or 40 years ago. And oh, sister so-and-so, man, she used to cuss like a sailor. She doesn't anymore. I wonder why she ever did that anyway. You didn't intend to do that, just look at her. But you start thinking about the people who are around you and you know something about one another's past. And before you realize it, 5 minutes of worship is past. And then you think, oh, wait, there's something going on up here. And because you're focused on those around you for the last 5 minutes, on whom have you not been focused for the last 5 minutes? Haven't been thinking about God and His greatness. You see, we tend to do some of the same things in principle that Simon is doing right now because he becomes so focused on this penitent sinner's past, he's not seeing the greatness of Jesus that's standing right before him in His presence. But perhaps greatest yet, because Simon becomes distracted by this sinner, brothers and sisters, he misses out on his opportunity to serve Jesus. It's verse 40, where Jesus answers and says to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. So he said, give it to me, teacher, say it. Now, you have to understand, and I'm sure that you do, who a Pharisee is in the New Testament. And this isn't every Pharisee, but this is the typical Pharisee during the time of Jesus. Do you recall the parable that Jesus gave about the tax collector and the sinner in Luke chapter 18? And do you remember the condition as to why he gave that earthly story with a heavenly meaning? The purpose behind it is stated. He spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous, and that's where we form the single word. We like to do that in English. 2 words, that's too much. Let's make it into one. Self-righteous. The Pharisee in that parable thought he was so good, he didn't need God's forgiveness. He spoke this parable to some who thought they were righteous, self-righteous, and they despised others. In other words, because the Pharisee of the New Testament saw him or herself as the epitome of perfection, anybody other than him or her would always be beneath that person. Nobody's as good as I am. That's the way they looked at themselves. Coincidentally, Simon thinks a lot of himself. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? What does he think about this woman who steps into his house? She's beneath him. Strangely enough, what does he think about Jesus who stepped into his house? He's beneath me because I'm perfect and nobody else will ever measure up to my standard. Now that's the kind of thinking that Simon has, and that's the kind of thinking that a typical Pharisee of the New Testament had. Now do you think they would go around and telling people that, though? I am perfect and you are beneath me. Well, of course they wouldn't. But that's what they think on the inside. He thinks he's perfect. He thinks he's doing everything right, and nobody, including Jesus, measures up to his standard. But this teacher, who's respected by so many, is invited by Simon to come into his house. And so Jesus finally says to him, Simon, I have something that I want to tell you. And when he says, okay, go ahead, tell me what you have on your mind, I think probably what he's thinking is Jesus is going to compliment how great he is. Man, you really got this God service thing figured out, Simon. I want to tell you, you're doing a great job. You are so kind to open up your home and to have a feast today. How generous you were to invite me into your home. I believe that's probably what Simon has on his mind. But remember what he thinks about Jesus at this point. He thinks that Jesus isn't even a prophet, because he obviously doesn't understand the actions of this woman. Folks, Jesus is about to blow Simon's mind that not only does he know the actions of this woman, but that he actually knows the thoughts of Simon's heart. We find in verses 41 and 42 Jesus giving a parable. It's rare that Jesus gives a teaching in the New Testament without connecting a parable to that, and he does that in this instance as well. Luke chapter 7, verses 41 and 42, Jesus says, Simon, I've got something I want to tell you. Okay, sure, what do you have on your mind? Well, there was this certain creditor who had 2 debtors. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing with which to repay, he freely forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him more? Now, interact with me here just a little bit. I want you to raise your hand if you've ever done business in denarii. Okay, all right. Explanation might be in order here. You probably already know what that is, but some may not. A denarius is just a single one of these Roman coins, and a denarii is a multiplicity of them. I know it's kind of confusing to us because in English, usually our plural words end in S. Well, the S-ending word is actually the singular, denarius, and the plural ends it with I, denarii. It's kind of like cactus and cacti. It seems like it's reversed. That's the way it works. Well, a single denarius, that was a Roman coin, and for just a normal person living as a Jew in the Roman Empire, you do a hard day of manual labor, and you're going to get one of these Roman coins. To give you an idea of how spoiled we are in our culture, do you know what a denarius back then is worth in an American equivalency today? Less than a quarter. Can you imagine trying to live on less than a quarter a day from back-breaking labor? Okay, people aren't sitting at desk jobs. They're out working agriculture or with animals, or they're building buildings without power tools for less than a quarter a day. Okay, 500 denarii would be approximately 1 2/3 years' salary. All right? Now, in an average year, a Jew would make less than 100 American dollars. Try to support your family on less than $100 a year. Gives you an idea of their poverty, gives you an idea of how spoiled we are in this land. How much has God blessed us in this place? We need to recognize it and thank Him for it always. But if you factor in standard of living, the one debtor owes this man $50,000. Kevin, I don't know if he just went out and bought a brand new Chevy Silverado, or if it was a Ford F-150. I'm kind of Asian persuasion when it comes to vehicles. I would prefer a Toyota Tacoma myself. I don't know what it is that he's gone out and he's purchased, but he's loaned this money from this guy. Maybe it's just for the necessities of life. And the only problem with borrowing money when you need it so badly is that it seems like you need it more badly when it comes time to repay it. And this guy, he probably can't repay his debt. You could do a lot of things with $50,000, couldn't you? Well, then you have this other gentleman, and he owes a debt also, and it's only 50 denarii. Factor in standard of living equivocally to you and me. He owes the creditor $5,000. I know that's not nearly as much as the other, but what could you do with $5,000? I'd like to have an extra $5,000, wouldn't you? I could do a few things with it. You could buy a serviceable used vehicle for that. But out of the goodness of his heart, this creditor looks at these two debtors, one who owes him $50,000, one who owes him $5,000. He says, you know what? Neither one of you owes me anything. Don't worry about it. It's just like you never owed me a dime. Well, that's kind of him, wasn't it? And so this is the parable that Jesus puts before Simon. And he says, I'm curious, Simon, tell me, what's your understanding? Which of these two would love him more? The one who's been forgiven the $50,000 debt or the one who's been forgiven the $5,000 debt? Well, Simon's a pretty sharp fellow. Verse 43, he answers and he says to Jesus, I suppose the one whom he forgave more. He said, good job. You've answered rightly. The wheels have to be turning in Simon's mind right now. You see, he probably thought Jesus was going to compliment him because of how great he is at serving God, how kind he's been in opening up his home and bringing Jesus into it. But instead, Jesus gives him a hidden teaching in a parable and asks him to make a deduction. And I think you see the sheepishness in the answer that Simon provides him. Well, I suppose, is this a trick question? I suppose the one whom he forgave more is the one who would love Jesus more. Jesus said, good job. Okay, Simon has to be thinking, but Christ, what does this teaching have to do with me? Oh, he's about to find out. Then he turned to the woman and he said to Simon, do you see this woman, Simon? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet. But she has washed my feet with her tears, and she has wiped them with the hair of her head. Simon, I came into your house, and you did nothing to serve me. I'm curious, why didn't you do that? And here's this woman, as we read earlier, she's standing behind Jesus. She probably doesn't have the moral courage because of her sins to face him. She's so distraught about the wrongs she committed against God. She knows Jesus is there. He can help her out with her sins. And so she comes to him. She's standing behind him, and she has her head down, and the tears are just streaming from her eyes. And as that's taking place, she notices, wait a minute. The feet of my Lord are dirty. Why did nobody wash his feet? And so it appears she comes down to the front, and she kneels down. And the only issue is she has no water of her own. This isn't her house. She can't just go and confiscate Simon's water for herself and start using that to wash Jesus' feet. But she realizes, well, there's natural water that's streaming from my eyes. And so maybe I can use that to help out my Lord and to get the dirt off his feet. And so as the tears are falling and hitting his feet, the dirt begins to lift, and she's thinking, but what am I going to do? This isn't my house. I don't have any towels that I can use to remove the dirt from my Lord's feet. And then she remembers that the Lord has given her a blessing. Not all of us have that, but the Lord has given her the blessing of hair on her head. And so she does something that for a woman in that culture would be considered a disgrace. As if her reputation isn't tarnished enough, she lets the hair down from her head. You know, even today in that part of the world, it's not common for women to put their hair down in public, and often they'll have a covering on their head. I don't know if she had a covering at this time or not, perhaps not, but her hair would have been up, and she does something that's considered a disgrace in that society. She lets her hair down in the presence of Jesus. And as the dirt's been lifted from his feet by the tears that have fallen from her eyes, she takes her hair and she begins to transfer the dirt from Jesus' body to her own head. Now you think about that. I'm not so sure what there isn't some irony involved in this, because she takes the material dirt that's on Jesus and she places on him herself to provide a service to him. Well, here in just a little bit, Jesus is going to take the consequences of the dirt of her soul, and he's going to put those consequences on himself. Here she is with such limited resources and using the tears of her eyes and the hair of her head to clean up the feet of Jesus, because for some reason nobody else in that household thought to do so. Well, then you have Simon. And Jesus says to Simon, you have all these pots of water, Simon, in your house. Why didn't you use some of that water to clean up my feet? You have all these towels in your home. Why didn't you come to me and wipe that dirt that you had removed from my feet with the water? Why didn't you transfer that to the towels that you have in your house? Not only did Simon not do that, but there's no indication that Simon even thought about doing that. You know why? Because his mind was filled with how terrible this woman was, and in the process, he wasn't even thinking about the good that he could do for the Lord. Brothers and sisters, how many times do we spend criticizing the action of others? We fill our mind with these kinds of thoughts. We fill our lives with this kind of speech, and because they're so full of it, we don't have a whole lot of time left over to do good for God. Now, please don't misunderstand. Once more, I want to state, I don't want this to be unclear. I'm not saying that if there's sin in a brother or sister's life that we should turn a blind eye to that and not try to help the person out with it. This is a different situation. He's focusing on the woman's sinful past. Even though she's repented of her sins, he doesn't see it because he's thinking about how bad she's been in the past. He's not considering all the good he can do for Jesus in the present. And so he's doing essentially nothing for him. That bothers Jesus. Why is it this woman with such limited resources has done for me what you with such abundant resources should have done for me? Well, here comes that time again. We need to make a connection to ourselves. Is Jesus ever going to stand before us in the flesh on this place outside of his second return? Is Jesus ever going to become passing through our town and need a place to stay on this earth? Is Jesus ever going to physically walk into our home so we can serve him? No. You remember what Jesus says, though, in Matthew chapter 25 and verse 40? Truly, I tell you, whatever you have done to one of the least of these, understand something, you have done it to me. Or whatever you have not done to one of the least of these, understand something, you have not done it to me. Remember how we're talking about the blessings that we have in this place? Not only do we have water and towels like Simon did, we have running water. We have hot water, we have cold water, and we can blend them just to the comfort of the body, can't we? We have these big fluffy towels, and you might not take hot showers in Florida. I don't know. In Missouri, we need hot showers in the winter. And so I'll take a hot shower, and I'll get out and have this big fluffy towel, and I'll just rub my face in it for probably a good minute. It feels so good. God's spoiled us, hasn't he? Let me ask you something. When's the last time we thought about the opportunities that we have to open up our home and to provide these wonderful blessings to somebody else who might need them? When's the last time we let them use the hot or the cold water, the perfect blend that comes out of our faucets and our fluffy towels that have been washed and they smell so good? When's the last time we did that? You understand, that is our Simon service opportunity that we often don't think a whole lot about. Why is that? What's on our mind instead? Verse 45, Jesus says to Simon, you gave me no kiss. But this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. Of course, you understand that the kiss is a form of greeting in that place. It's not the only one. But it was one way that people greeted one another. I, for one, am thankful that we don't sugar each other today whenever we see one another. I understand that was a holy kiss, but we usually shake one another's hands or we hug each other's necks. Well, that's what it is, just a form of greeting. Simon, I came into your house, and you didn't even greet me. How does this fit, though, with you and me? I want you to think not about your physical dwelling, but about your spiritual home, your church, and your church family. When's the last time when a visitor, you have a lot of those, don't you? When's the last time a visitor walked through the door, you're the first one to go up there, "Hey, how are you doing? What's your name? Where are you from?" You understand that's our Simon service opportunity. And as much as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. If you didn't do it to one of the least of these, you missed out on your opportunity to serve me. She has not ceased to kiss my feet. She didn't have to do that. Are we genuine when we talk to visitors? Do we go above and beyond what we really just have to do? And do we spend, if it's okay with their schedule, 5 or 10 minutes actually trying to get to know them and to find out, is there any way I can serve you? That is our Simon service opportunity. Verse 46, "You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil." Now the oil is a lot like a conditioner for the head, or like what a lotion is to the body. And it's fragrant. It has a pleasant aroma to it. So if you're thinking about lotions, think Bath and Body lotions. I like those. Do you? Not the girly sense, but I think they're all girly actually. They smell good, don't they? Well, think Bath and Body lotion, but this is much more expensive than that. As far as what it carries with a price tag, think about a really expensive perfume or cologne, very top of the line. This woman is probably limited in her resources, but she spends her most valuable commodity to do for Jesus what she's not required to do. Why? Because she cares about him so much, and she knows the good that he can provide to her. Simon, why didn't you bother to spend any money on me whenever I came into your house? I want to return to this idea about a visitor coming into God's spiritual home that we're blessed to be a part of. And meeting a visitor and talking to that person for just a little while. When's the last time that you offered to take a visitor out for lunch after worship? Do you see the person as valuable enough to spend a little bit of resources on him or her? This is our Simon service opportunity. If you allow me once more, I'll quote Jesus, "Truly I say to you, whatever you did to one of the least of these, you did it to me. Or whatever you did not do to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." Are we taking advantage of the opportunities that Jesus puts before us to serve him? Or instead do we fill our time with just sitting back and criticizing others for all the bad things they're doing in their lives? Verses 47 and 48, here's the punchline. "Therefore I say to you, Simon, her sins, rest assured, which are many." Listen, Jesus isn't condoning this woman's past. She was a sinner. She was lost. She recognized it. She repented of her sins. She sees the greatness of Jesus and the inferiority of herself. She begins her service to Christ, and he says she was a sinner with many to her credit. But I'm going to tell you something, Simon. Her sins, which are many, they're all forgiven. Here's the reason why. For she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. See what Jesus is telling Simon? The problem with your life, Simon, is you're so in love with yourself, you don't have any room left over to love me, and you don't have any room left over to love people. And that's the issue with you. Now, this had to be a shock for Simon, and if others heard it, they were probably flabbergasted, because he's a religious leader, and everyone thinks he's the best of the best. But God sees him in a different light. Then he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." Well, immediately, verse 49, those who sat at the table began to say to themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" I wonder, don't you? Maybe it's not just a human being who's standing before them. Perhaps it's a divine being who has the prerogative from the Father to do such a thing. We find in verse 50, then he said to the woman, "Go in peace. Your faith," or your dependence in me, "is what it is that has saved you." Outside of Jesus, there are two prominent characters in this story of Luke chapter 7. You have Simon, the unloving, self-righteous Pharisee, and you have the forgiven, sinful woman. Now that's what we know about the two right now. But if we were to strictly look at things from the human vantage point, what would we think about these two characters? You see Simon, who is a member of the strictest group of God's people, and we'd say, well, that's a plus to his credit. You see Simon, who's likely a leader of God's people. Well, that's likely a plus to his credit. You see Simon, who doesn't commit very many sins. That's a plus. Those are all good things to his credit. And then from the human standpoint, we see this woman who hasn't been to church in forever. We see this woman who's so tangled up in so many sins, but the one that perhaps really stands out, she's been a town prostitute. Boy, what a mess she's made of her life. She hasn't had very much success in it. If that's all that we knew as human beings see things, which one of these two would you rather be? But if we incorporate the way God looks at things and the fullness of what it is that takes place, and you find out more about this man, and in the case of Simon, he's not interested in people's repentance. He doesn't want to help out sinners who are struggling and are trying to make their lives right with the Lord. He thinks he's so amazing, nobody impresses him, not even Jesus. And when Christ gives him the opportunity to serve, he doesn't bother doing what he could for Jesus. But then we find out about this lady who's been so tangled up in sin. She's so sorry for every one of them that she's committed against God. She wants to fix her life. She knows that she can't do it on her own. And so she solicits Christ's help. She knows that he's perfect and he can help her out. And from this point forward, she's going to do everything she can with limited resources to serve the Lord. Now, if you had to pick now with that kind of information, which one of these two would you select? Brothers and sisters, when sinners distract us, it's nobody but we ourselves who miss out. Appreciate your good attention and looking forward to the rest of the week together. Thank you.